The date is April 2nd, 2023. Competitive Pokemon player Luka arrives to the Fort Wayne Regional Championships in dominant fashion, playing incredibly well in Day 1 and qualifying for Day 2, where he is the #1 seed, the player with the absolute best record of anyone in the room. In the past, Luka had some incredible tournament runs, but never quite managed to capture first place at a major event. Despite this, he has the respect of every player in the room as they know that he's capable of doing it, and today just might be the day. As round 13 in Day 2 begins, Luka sits down across from his opponent, Fiona, yet another accomplished player who hasn't quite managed to clutch a championship either. The match begins, and
nice chunk of damage as well. Kingambit does take this mandatory turn to sleep. This is the fissure turn, Joe. This is the fissure turn, and it connects! Gets the connect on the fissure with the +3. Kingambit gets that one-hit KO, and that is the play Fiona needed to make to stay in this game.
Well, that's not good. Luka loses his Kingambit to Fiona's Fissure Ting-Lu, an important piece to his team. That losing causes a domino effect where his strategy begins to fall apart, eventually losing Game 1 of the set. Well, there's always Game 2. The set isn't over.
Full 3 turns of sleep on this Kingambit. Fissure connects again on this Kingambit. Kingambit not able to do anything in either of these two games. Little bit of chip damage onto this Arcanine. Ting-Lu goes for the fissure again into the Amoonguss. That is 3 out of 4. That is a 75% on a 30% accurate move. Ting-Lu once again free to maybe click fissure. This turn it gets another one.
Fiona, stop!
No way! Onto the Arcanine. That is all KOs in this game have been fissure.
Fiona, cut it out! What are you doing?
And Luka sees that this is too tough of a wall to climb and has locked in the forfeit.
He was the #1 player, had the best record in the game. It's just unbelievable to hit that many fissures. It's 30% accuracy.
But you were 80% on the 5 fissures you went for. It was absolutely insane.
Well, Luka, you can't win them all. This is an OHKO move. OHKO moves in Pokemon are, to say the least, a little controversial. We've all been in this position. Maybe you're close to beating a casual playthrough of Pokemon, or you're deep into a Nuzlocke run, or worst of all, you might be in a tournament match. And suddenly you see your Pokemon's health bar go from this to this. No, it's fine. That's totally fine. Articuno should totally beat Incineroar. I was just assuming that this game would play out normally. My bad. I thought we were playing a good game. But what if I told you that Pokemon is a good game, and despite what I just showed you, the OHKO move is arguably one of the most balanced mechanics in all of Pokemon in just about every context. So what exactly is an OHKO move? Well, it does what it says on the box. The OHKO move is a one-hit knockout attack, meaning that regardless of if the target is at full health with maximum defense boosts and some kind of defense boosting item, if the OHKO move connects, that Pokemon will faint before the turn is over. This is why Luka kept losing Pokemon that were at full health during his match. There's 4 of them: Horn Drill, Guillotine, Sheer Cold, and of course, Fissure. The only real distinguishing factor between all these moves being the type of move that they are. Obviously, these moves have to have some kind of limitations on them, right? Surely you can't just spam these moves. Well, there is a limitation. These moves all max out at 8 PP, meaning that you have 1 for each of your opponent's Pokemon and some change once you're done. I know what you're thinking. That doesn't sound very balanced at all, but this narrator sure sounds handsome. And my mother would ensure that you are wrong about that first statement. Not only am I the most handsome Latino in Chicago, but OHKO moves are balanced with such care that there's no way it was an accident. Right? Surely we don't have a bunch of monkeys with typewriter situation where things just kind of panned out well. Well, I don't know. OHKO moves in Pokemon have a pretty dire setback that has to be considered every time that they're used. They're not very accurate, at least not in most situations, and the moves will sometimes outright not work at all. OHKO moves start at 30 accuracy if the user is the same level as the target, and they'll have their accuracy increased by 1 for every level that the user is above the target. So in order for an OHKO move to be 100% accurate against a Pokemon, the user would have to be a whole 70 levels higher than the target. This means that in a casual playthrough, there's virtually no situation where an OHKO move isn't an outright gamble. The Pokemon that can learn an OHKO move earliest in a playthrough is Excadrill, who learns Horn Drill at level 31. You would need to raise this Excadrill to be 41 levels higher at level 72 to have a 100% chance to OHKO the level 2 Patrats at the first route of the game. At this point in the game, virtually every move that Excadrill could use against that Patrat would effectively also be a one-hit knockout move. This applies to the level cap as well. A level 100 Excadrill is likely going to one-hit KO any Pokemon that's level 30 or below. Even if the Pokemon were just 20 levels above another Pokemon, meaning that the OHKO moves were 50% accuracy against the targets, their regular moves would still likely one-shot the target, making regular attacks far more reliable in basically every situation. To make matters worse, OHKO moves can't have their accuracy boosted by any means regarding stat changes. So this means that you can set up as much as you want, but it won't matter at all. This change was likely made due to the fact that Generation 1 was broken in half by OHKO moves. Back then, OHKO moves were about 30 accuracy and would fail if the user was slower than the target. However, an X accuracy would cause all OHKO moves to always land, making this a pretty great strategy for a glitchless speedrun of Generation 1. Just head to the Celadon department store, load up your shopping cart with them, use one of your Nidoking at the start of the fight, and sweep through the Elite Four like it's nobody's business. While this change does significantly nerf OHKO moves, at the very least, things can't really get any worse. That trusty old OHKO move will always be 30 accuracy in an online battle no matter what. We'll come back to that. Okay, so far, all I've really done is kind of sell you guys on the idea that OHKO moves may not be overpowered, but they're certainly usually useless. So while Fiona may not have had a broken move on her team, she certainly got pretty lucky, and given every bit of information I've given you so far, yeah, that sounds like it's right, but this isn't actually true. OHKO moves have a pretty deep history of use in competitive Pokemon, and have situations where the moves are strictly optimal. But before we get to that, let's briefly talk about other games with, quote, one-hit knockout moves. We need to do this to appreciate just how well Pokemon actually implements them. Now, bear in mind, I'm a Pokemon player and not an expert in other games, so if I say something wrong, just pretend that I'm right. Does this sound familiar?
I've assembled all 5 special cards, all 5 pieces of the puzzle. Exodia! Obliterate!
Exodia, the Forbidden One. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, upon collecting all of Exodia's body parts in the player's hand, the player using Exodia will instantly win the match. And nobody uses it. Are they stupid? No. Exodia is actually just kinda bad, and it's for a pretty intuitive reason. In a card game, your greatest resource is, well, your cards. And while you do get to draw 5 cards at the start of a duel in Yu-Gi-Oh!, the odds of the first player getting all 5 pieces are minuscule to say the least, with them having a less than 1 in 658,000 chance of drawing all 5 and winning before player 2 can take an action. Player 2 does get to draw a 6th card, which boosts their odds to 1 in 18,800 if they have all 5 pieces in hand, but that's still not great. Now, these are both turn 1 win cons, but can't the players just try to assemble the cards over the course of the game? Yeah, but you need to keep in mind that for every turn that you take to assemble the pieces in hand, your opponent could just disrupt your hand and make you start over. And since the cards are literally useless until you have all 5, they're just taking up space in your hand, preventing you from using actually useful cards to get a draw engine going and try to get more pieces. So while on paper drawing 4 pieces might sound like a great start, there's a pretty high likelihood that you'll never see that last card, since you'll just have to pass turn after turn after turn. This means that Exodia is considered to be a pretty bad deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! That bricks, like, a lot. Alright, now does this sound familiar? It should if you've played Super Smash Bros. Mr. Game & Watch has an attack called Judgment. This attack causes him to pull out a flag numbered 1 through 9 and hit the opponent with a hammer. Depending on the number pulled, the attack will have different effects, knockback, and damage. Intuitively, the number that we want to look at here is 9, as the 9 will almost always kill if the target is at 9% or higher, which is basically a one-shot, as it's not really hard to get someone to 9% in Smash Ultimate. That's like a couple of jabs. Each number has a 1 in 9 chance of being pulled, meaning that the odds of getting one shot is 1 in 9, or about 11%, with the user being unable to pull the same number twice in a row, as basically just a countermeasure to make sure no one pulls 2 9s in a row. In most situations, it's just going to be better for the Game & Watch player to use any one of their other attacks, as they don't have the same long startup and easily punishable gambling factor that Judgment does. Occasionally as a Hail Mary, is it a good idea to try to pull a 9? Well, of course. As a matter of fact, if the player is behind in a match and it falls within the final 5 seconds of the match, the odds of a 9 go up to 50%, which is simultaneously ridiculous and hilarious, as most of the time the game encourages the player to just use normal moves until it's absolutely necessary to try to go for the one shot. Or you can just gamble away every opportunity and try to get cheese KOs. Now, Pokemon isn't a card game. Well, not the one that we're talking about, but it's also not a fighting game. Well, not the one that we're talking about. Pokemon is a turn-based RPG. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, Exodia is practically unplayable in modern formats, and in Super Smash Bros., Judgment is an extremely punishable move that's not worth going for in a serious environment. These games implemented OHKO moves in such a way that they practically have no competitive use, other than just, well, hoping, which in a competitive environment is never going to be the best option. Pokemon manages to walk this fine line to make their OHKO moves both extremely punishable and not worth using in most situations, while still having real applications. It's kind of incredible, so let's finally explore that. But before we do, if you made it this far in the video, I want to remind you all to leave a like in the video and subscribe if you haven't already. If you want to support me further and get access to exclusive videos and my members only Discord server, you can either click the join button below or join my Patreon for as little as $1 a month. This lets me pay for editing and keep the channel afloat, so if you enjoy, please consider doing this. Now back to the video. Remember when I said that it was a nerf to OHKO moves when Game Freak decided to make it so they don't get affected by accuracy or evasion? Well, that's not strictly true. In a way, you could call this a bit of a situational buff. I know a 30% chance to land an OHKO move isn't the greatest of odds, but when you take into account the fact that you have a whole 8 attempts, you'll find that there's actually a 94% chance that you actually eventually land the one shot. Not exactly great, but consider the following. In competitive Pokemon, there's been a long history of players using evasion strategies that are sort of an all or nothing gamble, where they set up one Pokemon to have maximum evasion and defenses to make the likelihood of connecting an attack with the user so low that they can effectively stall out an entire team under the right conditions. Some notable offenders here are Eviolite minimize Chansey with Shuckle in Generation 7, minimize Alolan Muck with Smeargle in Generation 9, and minimize Overqwil with Mega Sableye in Pokemon Champions. Every single one of these strategies are hair-pulling levels of frustrating to deal with. And while there are moves that can bypass accuracy checks, with the exception of Kingambit's Kowtow Cleave, these moves leave a lot to be desired in terms of damage. It's pretty unlikely that you're going to break through a Chansey with Aerial Ace. I'm sorry. At maximum evasion, the chances of landing a 100% accurate move into the target is only 33.3%, and the damage done by that move is likely to be healed off by the time you land a second one. But let's say you only need to land one to get rid of the problem Pokemon. Suddenly, that 94% chance to land a single OHKO move doesn't sound so bad now, does it? Well, this is one of the real applications for OHKO moves in Pokemon, and it's arguably the actual intended use for them by the developers. Under the right conditions, a move known for its inconsistency suddenly becomes the most consistent move you can use for the situation. Now, this isn't to say that all Pokemon that run OHKO moves are these forces fighting against a greater evil, such as the case with anti-evasion applications. Sometimes the OHKO user is kind of the evil one. Dondozo is a notorious fissure user, where certain Pokemon run OHKO moves due to the numerous opportunities given to them by facing against evasion stall teams to click the move over and over again. Other Pokemon just make their own opportunities. Dondozo sports one of the most ridiculous bulks we've ever seen in Pokemon, with 150 HP, 115 defense, and the ever frustrating pure water type on a defensive Pokemon. On the right team, paired with the right Pokemon, solo Dondozo will often run Fissure as its fourth move alongside Yawn, Protect, and Wave Crash, with Yawn and Protect allowing it to put opponents to sleep, Wave Crash being a catch-all stab water move to get damage on demand, and Fissure being slapped on there because, well, with bulk like Dondozo's and lots of sleeping opponents, there's no real reason not to just throw out a move here to fish for the cheesy knockout here and there. Dondozo takes this relationship that OHKO moves have against stall teams and flips it on its head to exploit it. The real downside to spamming the gamble move turn after turn is the fact that most Pokemon can be knocked out with a move or two. But Dondozo is certainly not one of those Pokemon, especially when it's paired with Ting-Lu, who can artificially boost its special defense and trap in opponents with Sand Tomb, forcing Pokemon with bad matchups into the two to have to stay in and withstand the barrage of attacks and yawns. If I had to compare it to anything, I'd say that this is the Game & Watch player who really likes to go for 9s at every opportunity as long as it's safe. But sometimes, Fissure is used because there's just no other better option. Take for example Joe Ugarte's Portland Regional Championship team. Joe had a Torkoal on the team which had Fissure, which is odd when you consider the fact that Torkoal is typically used as a strong fire-type attacker that's better off clicking its sun-boosted moves than going for a gamble with an OHKO move. So why Fissure over Heatwave or Eruption? Well, to put it bluntly, Joe had a bit of a Dondozo problem. Joe's team was extremely physically oriented and didn't have many of the traditional means of taking down commander-boosted Dondozo, a fairly common strategy in the format around this time. He did have the means to deal with Dondozo through sheer firepower, as Choice Specs Fluttermane and Chien-Pao were more than capable of the burst damage needed to take one down, but one bad misplay could put Joe in a pretty unwinnable position. So, Joe put Fissure on Torkoal as a backup plan. Where some people would rather go for Judgment at every possible time, Joe was more of a last 5 seconds of the game Hail Mary kind of guy. Here's where things get juicy. Sometimes the best reason to run an OHKO move is to, well, not use the OHKO move. There have been multiple times in history where OHKO moves were used for reasons outside of the move's one-shotting properties. Take for example Gastrodon back in 2017. One of the most pathetic iterations of Gastrodon was its Sun and Moon rendition, where it didn't have access to Earth Power, its best ground move, due to the fact the TM was not in the game. It was left using either Mud Shot for very weak special damage or its physical ground moves Earthquake or Stomping Tantrum. In order to circumvent the usually low damage and snipe KOs against Pokemon like Tapu Koko, Gastrodon would often run Groundium Z to power up its ground-type move once for significantly higher damage. And due to the fact that the Z move's power was dependent on the base move, Earthquake would result in a 180 power move rather than Stomping Tantrum's measly 140 power move. But there was an alternative to Earthquake which some players opted for: Fissure. You see, Gastrodon's Earthquake was being used almost exclusively for that one-time Z move anyways, and the damage done by Earthquake outside of that was virtually nothing, due to Gastrodon having a low attack stat and the fact that Grassy Terrain would cut the move's damage to a quarter of its usual amount. So players could reap the 180 base power of the Z move off of Fissure while still having the OHKO move as an option that was more broadly applicable over Earthquake's negligible damage. Of course, this lack of special ground moves was fixed by the time that Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon came out, so Fissure Gastrodon virtually went extinct within the year. A current use case for OHKO moves outside of their inherent gamble is being seen today with the rare but still relevant Mega Excadrill team. Mega Excadrill has a set of qualities that allows for it to take advantage of Horn Drill better than any other Pokemon in history. Horn Drill is a fairly unique move among the OHKO moves, as unlike Fissure or Sheer Cold, it's a contact move. Mega Excadrill has the ability Piercing Drill, which causes all contact moves used by the Pokemon to bypass Protect, albeit with their damage cut to a quarter of their usual amount. But a quarter of infinity is still infinity, so if a Pokemon protects in front of Excadrill, it can throw out a Horn Drill for free with absolutely no downside. And while one-shotting a Pokemon while it protects is cool and all, things get more interesting if Excadrill misses the attack. Stomping Tantrum is a ground-type attack which is a mediocre 75 base power. While this is acceptable for most Pokemon to use on its own, its secondary property of doubling if the previous attack failed makes this move highly desirable, as Excadrill can not only throw out a no-drawback Horn Drill to fish for the one-hit KO, but if it fails to connect on the turn that the opponent protects, the Stomping Tantrum it goes for the next turn will be 150 power, virtually guaranteeing the one-shot into many Pokemon. Stomping Tantrum with an OHKO move is a pretty niche strategy that only a few Pokemon can go for. But the most notorious of these users in history was, well, the day is April 2nd, 2023. Fiona Shimkiewicz arrives to the Fort Wayne Regional Championships in dominant fashion, playing incredibly in Day 1 and qualifying for Day 2, using her incredible balance team centered around a Ting-Lu with a special moveset not seen before this event: Fissure and Stomping Tantrum Ting-Lu. Ting-Lu has some of the best bulk in the game with its massive 155 HP and 125 defense, with an ability that lowers every other Pokemon's special attack stat. It's uniquely positioned in the format as a Pokemon that can sit in and click solid damaging moves like Ruination and Heavy Slam to support the team, but also be a threat as it has the same level of bulk that Dondozo has to be able to throw out fissures many times in a single game. And then, upon missing those fissures, click a stab-boosted double power Stomping Tantrum, dealing massive damage to anything in its way. The point of this Pokemon is not only to threaten the OHKO move, but to be able to effectively compensate for the wasted turn by using such a powerful follow-up that wouldn't be possible if not for the missed OHKO move. In round 13 and day 2, she sits across the table from the accomplished player Luka and finds herself in a situation where Ting-Lu can go for the Fissure Stomping Tantrum combo. She clicks the Fissure and it connects. She takes game 1, but game 2 is still to come. She finds herself in a similar situation. She clicks Fissure into the King Gambit and again, it connects. This is outstandingly lucky. She clicks it again into the Amoonguss, knowing that this is a Pokemon that can effectively wall her team and be a massive nuisance in the match. Even if this doesn't connect, the following Stomping Tantrum should be enough to—
Fiona, stop!
Oh, it connected again. The game is now heavily in her favor. She goes for the Fissure into the Arcanine, as while clicking Stomping Tantrum twice is going to get the job done, going for Fissure and missing first is effectively the same thing, and it connects again. The game is over. Fiona just 2-0'd the player in the room with the best record so far in a set filled with ridiculously lucky RNG. On the surface level, it would seem that Fiona absolutely stole this game due to that luck with her OHKO moves. But that doesn't really tell the whole story. Fiona landed 4 out of the 5 fissures she went for against Luka, an absurd 80% accuracy during the set, with a move that is hypothetically broken. I mean, if an OHKO move always lands, it's the best move in the game, right? Well, we can actually quickly take a look at this in action, as in recent memory, there are a couple of instances of 100% accurate OHKO moves in matches. Back in the start of Generation 9, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet had, well, a few bugs. One of these was the fact that the RNG seed didn't change from game to game in online matches. This meant that the outcome of certain things was completely predictable. For example, Heatwave would always miss a second target on turn 1, and unfortunately, Sheer Cold in OHKO move would always connect. So here we have a game-breaking bug that would cause both players to have the option to just, well, annihilate a Pokemon off the board with a Sheer Cold user on turn 1. Yeah, not a great look. As a matter of fact, it was so easily exploitable that many grassroots tournaments actually banned OHKO moves until this got fixed, the RNG seed was randomized each game, and turn 1 was no longer completely predictable. A recent non-bug related case of accurate OHKO moves comes in Pokemon Champions, with the addition of Mega Hawlucha, a Pokemon with the ability No Guard. This ability causes it to never miss attacks, but also never have attacks miss it. By using the move Entrainment, it could pass its ability to Pokemon like Excadrill, Garganacl, Vanillux, and Snorlax, who would spam OHKO moves that would always connect. While this might seem broken on paper, tournament results would go on to show that the setup was far too predictable and easy to stop, to the point that it never really took off and it remained more of a gimmick than anything. This was arguably the best that 100% accurate OHKO move setups would ever be in a competitive setting, and despite this, it was still mediocre. Do what you may, but OHKO moves will never escape their purpose as, well, gambles. So, was Fiona really gambling here? I would argue no, not really. I mean, yes, in the sense that she was going for the OHKO move, but the Fissure Stomping Tantrum strategy was born from the conditions of the metagame surrounding it. A slow, bulky metagame where the slowest, bulkiest Pokemon happened to have access to not only an OHKO move, but the move that would make up for any lost damage on a turn where the gamble didn't pan out in the user's favor. This was a clever strategy that took the biggest downside of OHKO moves and turned it into a strength. As much of a risk as it is, and as lucky as she got in the set, luck doesn't take you to a top 4 finish. That's skill and dedication. On this day, in that set, Fiona was certainly the luckier of the two, but when all was said and done, Luka and Fiona would find their names next to each other in the final results, both eliminated in top 4 by different opponents, both still chasing that regional championship, and both still with the respect of every other player in the room. And both with a really funny story to tell about the time that one of the most balanced mechanics in Pokemon suddenly felt not so balanced. Thanks for watching. I do want to give a thanks to everyone for watching, but I especially want to thank all of my patrons and YouTube members that you see on screen right here. I especially want to give a thanks to these people who donated $20 a month. You guys are incredible. You guys help keep the channel afloat, and this is a big change in direction for the channel. So I just wanted to, you know, kind of pitch my my product here. If you guys want to support this direction the channel is going in, you can do a few things. You can leave a like in the video. You can check out one of my other videos. You can obviously become a member, share the video, do whatever. But yeah, just interacting with the video in any way helps out a lot. And of course, you know, turning on notifications and not missing any of my uploads helps me out quite a bit. I have a second channel where I upload every day about Pokemon Champions if you want to keep up with the day-to-day grind. But yeah, these videos are going to be a lot like this in the future. You can also watch my other video that I made in this style about the highest stats in Pokemon. But yeah, tell your friends, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.